Hello and welcome to the very first video of Brainstorm EDH. My name is Ike and I want this channel to offer some fun, casual commander deck building ideas in order to brainstorm over the many possible commanders throughout Magic's awesome history. Nothing competitive, just for fun with friends, and as you'll notice there's no particular budget we're working off of. It's just whatever we find fun. As with every deck, everyone will have their own preferences regarding what cards they'll include within their deck, so please take the recommendations within this video as simply suggestions. If you have any suggestions to offer the community regarding the commander we're about to discuss, then please comment on the video and tell us what they are. The commander we'll be discussing in this video is a cool one. It's Kotis the Fangkeeper, who stood out to me because he's Villainous Wealth on a legendary creature. Villainous Wealth is sorcery, all about stealing lots of spells for free out of your opponent's libraries, and Kotis is no different. He costs 1 generic mana, a black mana, a green mana, and a blue mana, and he's a 2/1 legendary zombie warrior with indestructible, and whenever Kotis deals combat damage to a player, exile the top X cards of their library, where X is the amount of damage dealt. You may cast any number of spells with mana value X or less from among them without paying their mana costs. Kotis is an interesting blend of the Voltron and Steal Your Stuff strategies, which led to an interesting time deck building. Now for those of you who may not be familiar with the term Voltron, it's used to describe a deck that primarily focuses on building up a single creature, usually the commander, to monstrous and lethal proportions. Anytime a commander encourages you to pursue multiple strategies, it creates some tough decision making. In this case, there's a bunch of my favorite go-to Voltron cards I want to incorporate, but there's also my favorite Steal Your Stuff package of cards to consider too. Both of these archetypes crammed into one singular deck are a pile of cards that far exceed the 100 card deck building limit, so this is where the tough choices have to be made. All that said, let's dive in. To start off, whenever I go to build a deck, I first come up with card categories in which I can group up everything I wish to include. This helps with figuring out if I have too many or too few cards in any given category. The categories I went with for this deck are the following: Ramp, Card Draw, Interaction, Voltron, and Value. These categories can be different for everyone, but I personally chose to go with these to start. Now let's jump into the first category, Ramp. This is the term used to describe the increase of available mana you have access to beyond what you would normally have by playing a single land per turn. Even though we're going to be focusing on taking other people's ramp from their decks with Kotis, I still want to make sure that I have ramp for myself, so that I can keep recasting Kotis if he's being repeatedly removed from play. The ramp pieces I chose for this deck are as follows: Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Fellwar Stone, Thought Vessel, 3 Visits, Nature's Lore, Kodama's Reach, Cultivate, Rampant Growth, and Farseek. Some of these cards may be considered fairly obvious includes, such as Soul Ring. However, I personally like to include Kodama's Reach and Cultivate in any deck that's 3 or more colors, as they help immensely with color fixing. You may also notice the weird inclusion of Thought Vessel, but that's simply due to the fact that I absolutely love having no maximum hand size. Fellwar Stone is there due to the fact that we're stealing other people's cards, and we may need colored mana that's not in our commander's color identity in order to be able to activate abilities of cards we steal. And now, on to the next category, Card Draw. There are few things worse than having no cards in hand an entire game, so I prefer to add in methods of both repeatable and bursts of card draw. Here are the card draw pieces I chose to include: Read the Bones, Rhystic Study, Black Market Connections, Quick Study, Sign in Blood, Night's Whisper, Phyrexian Arena, and Derelict Attic and Widow's Walk. I consider it to be a little risky to have card draw spells that have multiple pips of the same color and the mana value inside a 3+ color deck, but I'm going to be running enough multicolored lands that I don't foresee that being a big issue in this case. And by the way, a color pip is the colored mana symbol within a spell's mana value. Now, the only card of note I want to mention within the card draw category is Derelict Attic Widow's Walk. This card came out in the Duskmourn set, and it's a new favorite card draw spell of mine inside any Voltron deck that has black in its color identity. This card is a room enchantment, which essentially means that when you cast it, you choose which room you're casting to gain its effects. Then after it's on the battlefield, you can choose to pay the mana value for the other room on the card to gain its effect too. The Derelict Attic room costs 2 generic mana and 1 black mana, and reads, when you unlock this door, you draw 2 cards and you lose 2 life. Widow's Walk costs 3 generic mana and 1 black mana, and reads, whenever a creature you control attacks alone, it gets +1/+0 and gains Death Touch until end of turn. This is absolutely perfect for Voltron strategies. Also notice, these are cheap card draw spells. I want to be able to give myself a boost in the early game, when I need it the most to get established. Therefore, I didn't even consider anything more expensive than 3 mana. Kotis can take care of card advantage in the mid to late game by casting spells off of your opponent's libraries, but in the early game, I don't want to get stuck with an expensive card draw spell that I can't cast when I'm trying to dig for land, ramp, or interaction. Speaking of, the next category, interaction. This is a really important one. Interaction doesn't necessarily have to be removal. Anything that makes you say in response can potentially be called interaction, and it's one of my favorite things to say in a game of Magic. Here are the interaction spells I included. Swan Song, An Offer You Can't Refuse, Arcane Denial, Heroic Intervention, Tamiyo's Safekeeping, Ranger's Guile, Defend the Rider, Tyvar's Stand, Snakeskin Veil, Baleful Mastery, Assassin's Trophy, Infernal Grasp, Bitter Triumph, Imprison in the Moon, Song of the Dryads, Oubliette, Cyclonic Rift, Decree of Pain, and Ether Spouts. There's a lot of stuff in this category. There's counterspells, protection, single target or spot removal, and board wipes. When it comes to counterspells, I only like to have a few, but feel free to run as many as your playgroup is cool with. With protection, I feel like I mainly just needed spells that grant hexproof, as Kotis already comes locked and loaded with Indestructible. I also attempted to stick with 1 mana spells for this, to make sure I can easily protect Kotis without disrupting the ability to cast whatever I need to on my turn. The spot removal cards are pretty standard for me. I simply run my favorite cheap, effective spells that deal with problems on the battlefield. However, 3 big favorites of mine are Oubliette, Song of the Dryads, and Imprison in the Moon. All 3 of these cards, if used on someone's commander, completely turns it off until an opponent can remove the enchantments from the battlefield. As for board wipes, I want to give a huge shout out to Decree of Pain and Ether Spouts. Wiping a dangerous board and then drawing 20 cards is such a fun feeling. P.S. I really like card draw. And regarding Ether Spouts, even though 5 mana is a lot to hold up on your opponent's turn sometimes, the ability to eliminate the board that's about to kill you and potentially steal those creatures with Kotis if your opponent puts those cards on top of their library is awesome. And now we arrive at the Voltron category. This is essentially all auras and equipment used to boost Kotis' power in order to steal more and larger spells, or even take someone out with commander damage. Various methods to ensure that Kotis gets through any potential blockers is also included within this category. The cards I went with here are Loxodon Warhammer, Mask of Grizzlebrand, Prowler's Helm, Trailblazer's Boots, Swiftfoot Boots, Leyline Axe, Haunted Cloak, Brotherhood Regalia, Vorak Battle Horns, Alpha Authority, Indomitable Might, Rancor, Shadow Spear, Umezawa's Jite, Genji Glove, Buster Sword, Eldrazi Conscription, Canopy Cover, and Inquisitor's Flail. All of these cards are outstanding when it comes to Voltron strategies, and there are many more to choose from. Let me know in the comments what other auras and equipments you use for your Voltron decks. For now though, there's not too much to explain. These are all just good Voltron cards. I will, however, point out that I'm focusing a lot on evasion for Kotis since he has none by himself, and this deck relies heavily on Kotis landing hits on opponents. And finally, we have value. which is always the most fun category to throw together. This is where you no longer have to worry about the must-haves for your commander deck, such as ramp or removal, and can just throw in all the crazy cards that you find fun. Here are the value cards I chose to include. Unnatural Growth, Zapondral Hunger Dominus, the Ether Spark, Staff of Eden Vault's Key, Felix 5 Boots, Roaming Throne, Ancient Cellar Spawn, Mirror Room Fractured Realm, Strionic Resonator, and finally Lithoform Engine. There may not be much in this category, but man, I love these cards. This is where I throw in all the crazy, fun, and/or huge spells that made me love Commander. As I've mentioned before, it's very risky to include cards with a bunch of the same color pips and the mana value inside a 3+ color deck. But Unnatural Growth is simply a pet card of mine that works very well with aggressive decks. You'll notice there are several cards that can multiply triggered abilities. I decided to focus very heavily on taking a lot of other people's cards instead of rapidly killing opponents with commander damage, even though that's certainly something we can still do. As for Ancient Cellar Spawn, it's a 3/3 horror for 1 generic mana and 2 black mana, with 2 abilities. However, we only care about the second one. Whenever you cast a spell, if the amount of mana spent to cast it was less than its mana value, target opponent loses life equal to the difference. It's a straight up win condition for Kotis. Every spell we cast off of our opponent's libraries via Kotis will require 0 mana from us, thus making an opponent lose life equal to the entirety of the mana value of any of the aforementioned spells we cast. Now, you may have obviously noticed that I haven't really discussed lands yet. This is because, out of everything, land bases are the most unique aspect of a commander deck. And due to this, I'm going to leave that category up to your own imagination, with a few comments. If you have the ability, run all the crazy multicolor lands. If you want to save money, go with all basic lands. It's completely up to you. To start off, I normally have 33 lands in my average deck, but I will absolutely add in more lands over time if need be. If you would rather run more lands to start off and add more spells later after playtesting, that works too. I would also encourage you to run as many land destruction lands as you can muster, such as Ghost Quarter or Strip Mine, since lands such as Maze of Ith and Homeward Path completely shut down our entire deck. At some point in the future, I'll go over my ideology behind my land bases. And with that, we've reached the end of the deck building stage for Kotis. Now for some gameplay comments. Kotis is, as discussed, a villainous wealth on a creature. His entire thing is all about taking out players with their own cards and/or taking out players with commander damage. Because I'll primarily be focusing on taking out players using their own cards, that means the aforementioned inclusion of lots of triggered ability doubling. This will be the single greatest source of card advantage we'll have at our disposal with this deck. Kotis is a combination of card advantage and win condition on a single commander. A crazy potent combination. So, that's the end of the video. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I hope you found this helpful. Are there cards you'd include that I didn't mention? Let me know in the comments. Do you disagree with any of my inclusions? Feel free to let me know. As mentioned, this channel is dedicated to brainstorming all the possibilities. So if you have any brainstorming to add in yourself, please do so. Have a great day, and I hope to have you all tune in again for the next video.